we had a poll question for you that we're going to take a look at the results here in a bit. But first, allow me to introduce myself. I am Tom Goolsbee. I'm the Haslam Chair of Logistics at the Haslam College of Business at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. I also serve as the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Business and Logistics. Today's subject matter expert is John Santagate. John is Vice President of Robotics at Kerber Supply Chain. He's been with the organization almost a year and is responsible for Kerber's portfolio of robotic solutions. He has held senior management positions in a variety of fields, including market research, consulting, and sales before coming to Kerber in 2019. I also like to point out that John is also an instructor at his alma mater, the University of Massachusetts in Lowell, and appreciate him giving back in that way. I'm going to turn things over to John here in a few minutes, but please allow me to go over a few items first. Again, this is the 4th out of 5 sessions on the topic of labor challenges. I'll point out that the previous 3 sessions are available to you on demand, and we're going to have one more session on Tuesday focused on automation. And at that time, this particular masterclass dedicated to labor challenges will conclude. However, we're going to start another masterclass the following week, a week from Tuesday, dedicated to cold storage trends. Let's go over some housekeeping items before we get into the topic for today. So all of your phone lines are muted. The recording of today's class slides will be emailed to you within 48 hours. And again, if you'd like to access the session in its entirety on demand, you may do so. Just another reminder that we'd like to have your engagement. If you have any questions, please go to the GoToWebinar questions window and submit your question, and we will have time at the end of our session to address those questions. Also, again, a reminder of the 2 handouts that we have available to you with this session. You'll find these 2 handouts as PDF files in the handout tab of the GoToWebinar window. So let's take a look at how you responded to today's poll question. Again, the poll was, post-COVID-19, how are you planning to prepare for seasonality or surprise spikes? And you see the results there. More than half of you, 53%, indicated that you will be investing in technologies to augment staff, such as voice or vision technologies. Next in the sequence, 42% was other, and then 36% close behind was investing in fixed automation, such as conveyors and sorters. And then finally, 22% of you indicated that you would be investing in robotics, such as autonomous mobile robots. So thanks for that input. I think it provides some good insights as to where our audience is coming into today's session. And allow me to frame John's comments a little bit. Actually, what I'm going to do is hopefully set him up for a compelling story. But I think something that we'll all realize is that demand is very dynamic, and perhaps never more so than the times in which we're living in. Yet, it's hard to imagine that capacity is dynamic. And so if you see a demand pattern such as the one presented here, looking at 2 months of sales data, daily sales data, you see that there was a general decline in a trend before things leveled off into early April, a bit of a lull there for a period of about 2 weeks before something of a rise in demand as we started to reopen the economy. And you obviously, at that point, start to see a lot of daily variation. Depending upon the day of the week, you might see pitch demand, some peak, and then going into over the weekend, perhaps some leveling off of that demand. But a general increase, but a lot of lumpiness to the demand. And meanwhile, it's very hard to staff up. And whether I mean staff up in terms of labor capacity or technological capacity, it's very difficult to try to operate in a fashion commensurate with the lumpy demand that we see. And it occurs to me that an organization facing this situation depicted here might have been issuing furloughs at a time during which demand started to surge again. And so there is often this lag in what we see in the market and our response and the time it takes to onboard capabilities, whether it's people or technology. So again, it just underscores the challenge of scaling up and down. I tend to think of the levers that are available to us as threefold, as depicted here: people, process, and technology. Those of you that have participated in previous webinars in this masterclass series have heard me speak a bit about people, process, and technology, just kind of a broad orientation to how I look at problems in the warehouse and beyond. And what you see here are maybe some conventional attitudes toward concerns or opportunities perhaps around onboarding people, onboarding technology, as well as the process that brings it all together. And so, John, what I'd like to do is, based on this context, ask you, what are you seeing and advising customers in terms of scaling up and down their operations?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. To answer that question, I think that's inherent in today's topic. Throughout the the next 15 or so minutes here, we'll touch on that. But let's first start to frame the scenario, right? Seasonal peaks is not a secret. I think everybody here is well familiar with the impact of the holiday selling season. But first, I think it's important to think about the scale of the retail industry as an example. In 2019, total retail sales were over $4.3 trillion worldwide. But interestingly, we're seeing a transition in the channels from which those sales are occurring. Each of the last several years, there's actually been a continuous increase in the contribution of e-commerce as a contributor to total sales, to the point where in 2019, e-commerce sales contributed 16% of the volume to retail, whereas in 2018 it was 13%. And so we've seen continuous growth relative to the different channels and where that volume's coming from. And if we look towards Q4 of last year, about a quarter of the worldwide sales in retail came in that period. I think if we narrow that down to the point in time between the Black Friday season and out towards the end of December, the bulk of that volume typically occurs in that time frame. But that doesn't end peak, right? Because peak is not just about fulfillment; it's also about returns and following that particular peak season. If we could go back up to the previous slide here for a moment, it's not just about the selling season; it's also about returns and replenishment. And so, as organizations face these seasonal peaks, they also need to be prepared for what comes after. And over time, especially with the growth in e-commerce, we've seen an increased need for organizations to be capable of handling a significant volume of returns following that period of time, and that's both into the store and via retail. And again, that's changing dynamically as we see the returns processing evolve, right? Online orders can now be returned to a store, and that store may not even have an affiliation with the online order itself. As an example, Amazon orders can now be returned to a Kohl's store, for example. And so those stores and those environments need to be prepared, not just for the fulfillment on the front end of a peak, but also, the challenges that come following a peak. And then also to emphasize the growth, in 2019, there was 4.1% growth in Q4 overall compared to the previous year in the same period. So the amount of volume that occurred in that 3-month period grew 4.1% from 2018 to 2019. So, continued emphasis on increasing demand from customers. Now, as we look at this current slide here, what we see, and this isn't necessarily a secret, is that the holiday season is not the only peak that occurs. It may be the most well known, right? Perhaps the most significant overall, but there's several other peak periods that occur within the retail environments. Significantly, the back to college period, where students are preparing to go back into the dorms and they're procuring everything from bed sheets and linens to pens, papers, books, and food. The back to school period in late August, that accounts for $690 billion in spend occurs in that period in time. And again, that's spread out between brick and mortar and online channels. So, and then as we look out throughout the course of the year, there's many different peak periods, and across those different peak periods, different industries and different product types are facing a surge in demand. For example, in Mother's Day, you're seeing an increase in customized gift type of products and flowers. In Easter and Halloween, candy sales increase in the scale of volume that is occurring and the demand that's occurring in those environments. So, organizations, and this is especially important, I think, for third-party logistics organizations that may be servicing multiple different product types in multiple industries, need to be capable of expanding their operation to support these peaks throughout the course of a year. So if we could jump to the next slide, significant challenges. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do to scale for peak. And one of the most common themes we've heard over the last several years related to supply chain in general is labor shortage, right? And during peak, the common way of scaling is to add people. If you can throw more people into the facility, you can handle more products, right? But that's become increasingly challenging, especially as we see an increase in online fulfillment demand, and those environments, seeing peak at the same time, battling for the available labor that's there, coupled with what we've seen over the last several years, a significant shortage in labor. Up until the recent worldwide pandemic, there was 3.4% unemployment in North America and in the United States. And at a point in time towards the end of 2019, there was over 7 million available jobs and less than 6 million people looking to fill those jobs. And when you bring that together with the fact that the skills and qualifications of the available people may not align to the available opportunities, it creates a significant strain on organizations that are looking to add people. Add that to the fact that when you're scaling for peak, oftentimes you're adding temporary labor, employees that aren't familiar with the environment. These people need to be recruited, trained, and put into an environment where they may potentially add a layer of disruption and increase the risk of decreasing quality, for example. When you're scaling for peak, you also, another challenge is inventory itself. How do you ensure that you have the right product in the right place at the right time and at the right price, right? And that doesn't happen immediately. It's not easy. And when you're talking about peak, you also need to account for the changing expectations and changing demands and expectations of the customer. The interest from one peak period may change to the next peak period. If an organization plans for the previous level of expectation, that creates a significant amount of risk for an organization. So, you need organizations, we've seen struggle significantly with the ability to identify the best fit inventory positioning and the right products over time. Capacity and space is another challenge for peak. When you think about capacity and space relative to peak, if an organization is seeing significant increases around peak periods and they're operating out of their own warehouse, that means for the time for non-peak periods, you've got an excess in capacity. And what are you doing with that excess in capacity? And there's other levers to capitalize there. There's sort of warehouse space sharing platforms where you can lease short-term lease your space and so forth. But you don't want to be carrying excess capacity if you don't have to. You want to optimize the use of the space that you have. And then finally is quality. How do you ensure that you're giving your customers the right products and the right set of expectations? Because a single failure in today's environment can push a lifetime customer away and into the hands of a competitor. If we could jump to the next slide, please. So these challenges were also emphasized by MHI's annual industry report this year, where 56% of respondents to their survey indicated a company challenge in hiring and retaining qualified workers. So those warehouse workers that you do acquire, it's very challenging. You may train them and they may go somewhere else, right? There's the old saying, it's better to train an employee at the risk of them leaving than to not train an employee at the risk of them staying, right? And then compounding that fact was that 73% of respondents to this survey indicated that it takes 30 days to fill an open job position. And when you're scaling up for peak, and it's taking 30 days on average to hire one person, you really need to get ahead of it, right? And so, when you look at all of these different challenges, customer demands for lower cost, customer demands on response times, customer service expectations is a significant element relative to peak. Again, injecting temporary labor into a dynamic environment, expecting to meet, a perfect order fulfillment every time, increases the challenges relative to being able to execute to the level of expectation of the customer in your most critical point in a year. So if we can jump to the next slide here. So what can we do to address some of those challenges? The first point is to plan ahead. You don't want to fall short during peak. You don't want to miss the period. You don't want to inject risk there. So you start planning ahead and hiring early. You assess past performance. You work to understand the current market and be prepared several weeks, if not month or more, ahead of when your peak period is going to occur. Because when it happens, you don't have time to adapt and hire the people. You need to have them in place, and you need to be prepared to execute. Point two is simplification. You want to make it easy for new and temporary workers to become productive fast, right? And you can do this with simplified processes. You want to try to limit the systems and clicks that these new employees have to learn and understand in order to become productive. And you can automate where it makes sense. And quite frankly, it doesn't always make sense. Automation isn't always the answer, but if you can identify where it makes sense to automate and simplify the process for the humans on the other side of the equation, it enables the warehouse to be more adaptable to peak. And then a third point here is to modernize. Competing in the modern economy really requires leveraging modern technology to help support simplification. Can you use technologies that help you to reduce clicks, that help your employees to scale up quite rapidly? And you certainly can. And there's several technologies that are designed specifically for this purpose. You see on the screen here three technology areas that help in this capacity. And this isn't the only technology elements that help to drive simplification, but each of these technologies do. For example, voice-directed picking is designed to create a hands-free environment. The workers can take voice-driven commands to produce the work and not have to be worried about clicking through screens. And you can easily, and we've seen a significant uptick in this particular technology in this point in time in certain industries, such as grocery, where voice-directed picking is quite prevalent. And online order fulfillment of groceries saw a significant uptick recently. And so this technology became critical in allowing organizations to really scale rapidly in a time of crisis. You can look at pick and put to light types of technologies, right? Pick and put to light is designed to deliver visual cues to a worker to allow them to know what to pick and where to place, given a lighting system, a rack that's set up with red and green lights that helps show a worker where to go. And that's, again, it's about simplification. Instead of having having to click through screens, read paper, and identify where the product resides on a racking system, leveraging pick to light and put to light technologies really is about simplifying the process, which helps to accelerate the ability to improve quality in these sorts of environments. The more you can reduce the risk of a mispick, the better it is for being able to accelerate and deliver during peak. And my personal favorite in this grouping is mobile robots. This technology has several elements that allow an organization today to rapidly scale to meet peak demands. For example, imagine being able to tell a net new employee, you're going to work in zone X, and the robots are going to come to you and tell you what to do. You look at the screen, badge in, and then the robot then tells you what the item is you need to pick with a picture, where that item exists in the zone that you're at. You scan it and it confirms that you have the right order. If you don't, it tells you to put it back and get the right item. And then that robot may even tell you where the next robot is that you need to go interact with. And so instead of taking a week to train an employee and then 4 weeks for them to learn before they become fully productive, you can get your temporary employees productive much faster. But also, by leveraging mobile robotics, an organization simply can drop in additional robots to increase capacity of the existing base of labor. Now, that doesn't mean for an organization that may have to add, 50 or 100 people, typically for peak, robots eliminate all of that because you reach a point of diminishing returns at some point in time. But if you can reduce the number of temporary workers that need to go into place in that environment by increasing the number of robots and allowing those temporary workers to become productive faster, you can increase capacity, quality, and capability very, very quickly in these environments. Now, as I said, these aren't the only technology areas that help to deploy simplicity into an environment. They're meant to be solid examples and articulate exactly how they can be used.
Excellent. Well, thank you, John.